Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Breach of Trust by Cynthia Hamilton, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Mike's call came through just as Madeline turned into the parking lot at Monte Verde, the beautiful retirement and senior care complex nestled in the foothills of Santa Barbara. She had been making regular visits to this tranquil setting since her father decided he'd endured enough Colorado winters for one lifetime. And with that decision came the impulsive move west 4 months earlier, catching her completely off guard with barely a 24-hour notice of his imminent arrival. Being summoned by Monte Verde's director had her mind hopscotching through possible scenarios, such as having to find another place for her father to spend his retirement years. Finding something in Santa Barbara County would be almost as challenging as hunting down the Holy Grail. Mack was not only lucky to be accepted, he qualified for one of the few exceptions the facility made to balance their demographic, since his pension didn't amount to much by California standards. Madeline felt the exception was made on account of Mack's abundant charm and his former occupation. Everyone loves a firefighter, especially the top dog. But it wouldn't surprise her if management wanted to give his unit to someone who could afford to pay the going rate. If that was the case, she planned to pick up the difference without her father's knowledge so he could keep his apartment and keep his pride intact. If she had to find another place for him to live, she knew it would be a big step down since there weren't many places for seniors as nice as Monte Verde. It would also mean they would have to look for something outside of Santa Barbara County. Shoving those concerns aside for the moment, she answered Mike's call. Hi, I didn't expect to hear from you so soon. It doesn't take long to tell someone they're in perfect health, Mike said, feeling quite proud of his test results. Madeline congratulated him on his stellar checkup while she parked in a visitor spot close to the entrance of the main building. Are you headed to the office? She asked. Now that she was there, she was anxious to find out what she was up against. Yep, and I picked up a new client while I was waiting to see Cantor. Madeline had to laugh. Being the chatty sort, Mike had a knack for converting chance encounters into new cases. You'll have to fill me in after my meeting. Oh, right, I forgot, Mike said. I'll see you at the office. Okay, good luck. After Madeline ended the call, she took in the view for a moment before she got out of her Audi SUV. It was possible this confab was just a routine conference designed to assure their residents' family members all was going smoothly with their loved one's living situation. Since she never took anything for granted, Madeline braced herself for the worst, then greeted the receptionist with a cheery hello. Chapter 2. Thank you for being so punctual, the receptionist said as she led Madeline to the office at the end of the corridor. The director's schedule is jam-packed today. After she rapped on the closed door, she pushed it open and stood aside to let Madeline in. Hello, Madeline, Lydia smiled amiably as she gestured to the pair of chairs across from her. Thank you for coming on such short notice. No problem. My father's well-being is a high priority for me. Breaking eye contact for a moment, Lydia told the receptionist to send any calls to voicemail. Turning her attention back to Madeline, she said, Well, I can assure you Mack has assimilated into our little community perfectly. He's been a real joy to have around, and since he's so helpful, not to mention so handsome and engaging, he's become a favorite among the residents and staff. Judging by Lydia's sincere smile and the lack of any but following her praise of Mack, Madeline released the breath she'd been holding. I'm relieved everything is working out so well. Mack's had nothing but good things to say about Monte Verde, and he loves being here in Santa Barbara, which I'm thrilled about. I'm glad to hear that. It's nice when both the residents and their family members are on board with the move into a living situation like this, Lydia said diplomatically. Her tone hinted at the dramas that arose when either the parent or their offspring had objections to this kind of retirement living, which usually came with a hefty price tag. Madeline had no trouble imagining the conflicts that arose from making this kind of lifestyle change. Money was often the biggest issue. Though the facility took in less revenue for the few slots allocated to the low-income residents like her father, she suspected those residents were usually less demanding and more appreciative about landing in a place like Monte Verde. I'm very grateful this situation has worked out so well for everyone, she said. Are there any issues I should be made aware of? Not at all, Lydia reassured her. Mack's got a lovely temperament, and he's always offering to help out. Just between you and me, I wish more of our residents were like him, she said with a playful smile. Relieved by what she'd heard, Madeline nudged the meeting to a close. She was anxious to get back to the office now that she knew her father's housing wasn't in jeopardy. Well, I appreciate you keeping me updated, she said, rising out of her chair. There is something else I was hoping to discuss with you if you have the time. Madeline had heard that line often enough to know what usually came next. And judging by Lydia's suddenly serious expression, Madeline figured she wasn't looking to hire current affairs to plan an event. I'm good on time, she said, as she retook her seat. Tell me what's on your mind. We've got a rather sensitive situation on our hands, the kind we've never experienced in Monte Verde's 40 years of operation. But before I say anything else, I need your assurance that what I tell you will not be discussed with any residents or staff members. Just so I understand, the reason you're disclosing the situation to me is that your intention to hire my PI firm to assist you in resolving it. Lydia nodded, her expression solemn. But it's imperative that what I tell you or anything that you learn in the investigation will remain confidential. If we take the case, I can assure you this matter will only be discussed with you and my investigative team. If we find evidence a crime has been committed, such as sexual assault, suspicious death, or grand larceny, it will be your responsibility to report it to the police. Reading the anxiety on Lydia's face, Madeline said, Give me an idea of what's going on, and I'll let you know if this would be better handled by law enforcement. Lydia shifted in her chair, clearly uncomfortable with what she was about to say and the unsavory prospect of getting the SBPD involved. The spotless reputation was critical in their business, and she certainly didn't want it to get out that there was something going on at Monte Verde that required the services of a private investigator, let alone police involvement. She drew in a deep breath before laying out the situation. 3 weeks ago, one of our beloved residents was found dead in her condo. That disclosure got Madeline's attention. Marta Platts had been with us nearly 20 years. She was 87 years old, but in excellent health, and her mind was still very sharp. She warned me when she moved in that both her parents lived to 102. Lydia laughed at the memory. There were times when I was convinced she'd outlive me. After that brief moment of levity, Lydia's expression abruptly shifted to back to one of concern. Marta never shared much about her past with other residents or staff. I figured her reticence had to do with growing up in Germany during World War II. Despite the traumas she was exposed to as a child, or maybe because of them, Marta was a very strong woman. She could be a little demanding at times, Lydia admitted with a chuckle. But overall, she was kind and generous and well-liked. As Madeline listened, she speculated where this potential case was headed. The first thing that came to mind was finding any next of kin and possible heirs. But that kind of routine detective work wouldn't warrant Lydia's secrecy mandate. Excuse me for interrupting, but do you suspect Marta didn't die of natural causes? She asked. I know for a fact she didn't. The medical examiner concluded Marta died from an overdose of Xanactin, a new prescription drug for insomnia, which had not been prescribed by one of our resident physicians. I take it that medication was found in her unit, Madeline surmised. Only the empty packaging. Did you speak with the prescribing doctor regarding the overdose? I did, Lydia replied. He was quite shaken to learn that Marta had OD'd on the samples he'd given to her. He said he purposefully only gives out enough of that kind of medication to see if it will help before he writes a prescription. And from his interaction with Marta, he figured she was competent to follow the directions, but the autopsy showed there was enough of the drug in her system to conclude she'd taken all the pills at once instead of over a 2-week period as directed. Did Marta have any underlying health issues? Madeline asked. Lydia shook her head. No. The autopsy indicated she was in remarkably good health for her age. So her death was ruled a suicide, accidental or otherwise, Madeline said. That's correct. And I've since found something else that backs up the possibility that it was an intentional overdose. Lydia pulled a manila folder from her desk drawer. I made sure no one had access to Marta's unit until the results of the autopsy were released. Once the coroner's bureau determined the cause of death, I made a thorough check of Marta's condo to see if there was any work that needed to be done before I made it available to the next person on our waiting list. Lydia nervously drummed her fingers on the file, her eyes downcast while she worked up the courage to share information that could turn the situation into a nightmare for the facility. She drew in a deep breath and took the plunge. If I hadn't noticed the faucet in the bathroom sink was leaking, I wouldn't have found this cache of hate mail in an envelope taped to the underside of the sink. With obvious reluctance, Lydia slid the file across the desk. Madeline opened it and scanned the top sheet. It was an anonymous letter printed on white copier paper that had been folded in thirds. The author of the tirade claimed Marta Platz was guilty of bigamy, child abandonment, and cooperating with the Nazis leading to the deaths of innocent people. The other two missives made the same accusations with details of when and where her two marriages supposedly took place. The fact that Marta didn't destroy this information suggested she wanted it to be found by someone on staff, but she felt too ashamed to share the letters with anyone while she was alive. Since there's no demand for money in exchange for silence, the purpose of these letters was to upset Marta, Madeline surmised. Lydia nodded her agreement. And you suspect someone here at Monte Verde, either a staff member, a resident, or a visitor, drove Marta to suicide with these accusations? Madeline concluded. That's the only scenario I can come up with. According to her neighbors, she never had a single visitor come to see her in all the years she was here. I might not have acted on what I discovered had I not learned Marta wasn't the only one who'd been targeted, Lydia said. Since Marta's death, 2 other residents have come forward with the disturbing letters they received from an anonymous sender. Lydia reached into the desk drawer again and pulled out 2 other manila folders and handed them to Madeline. Madeline read the 3 accusatory letters in the first file. They claimed the recipient, Sylvia Bracken, was having affairs with some of the married residents, but the accuser didn't mention names. The second file contained 2 letters accusing Louise Standish of stealing from residents in the memory care wing. Like the hate mail to Marta Platz, these taunts were printed on generic white copy paper. Matching them to a printer would be a challenge, especially if they were printed off-site. It doesn't look like any of these women were being blackmailed, Madeline observed. No, I think these were acts of pure malice, solely geared to cause these elderly women distress. And these other women have no idea who might have written them? Madeline said. No, Lydia confirmed. But whoever's behind these horrible letters has to be stopped before other residents are targeted. Madeline understood the ramifications of something like this. As the facility director, Lydia had no choice but to have this matter investigated and put a stop to the harassment. I'm deeply troubled by what happened with Marta, and I want to do everything in my power to protect our residents from further harm, Lydia said. That means we have to find out who is behind these terrible allegations. Madeline scanned over the letters in the first 3 files, again, looking for a pattern or a possible MO. Whoever wrote them seemed to derive pleasure from shaming others. There was no way of knowing if the letters were authored by a member of staff, a resident, or a relative or friend of a resident. Did Marta leave behind any relatives that you're aware of? I don't know. She never said anything to me about her family. Madeline was already evaluating their options for tackling this case. Though it would be helpful to have information about Marta's possible family members, that was something they'd have to find out from birth and marriage certificates, which would be a tedious and time-consuming chore, considering when and where Marta was born. And she doubted that information would help them with their investigation. Since there were 3 victims of this cowardly harassment, the best course of action would be discreetly observing the residents and staff. At this point, everyone who had access to Monte Verde was a possible suspect. It just sickens me that someone would do such a vile, hurtful thing, Lydia said, breaking through Madeline's thoughts. These elderly women feel like their sanctuary and their right to a peaceful retirement have been violated. And you're not aware of any male residents who were also targeted? Madeline said. That's correct. As of right now, none have come forward, but that doesn't mean one of or more of them haven't received this kind of harassment, Lydia pointed out. If any of them had, they might have dismissed it as trash or felt uncomfortable about bringing it to my attention. Madeline could see the director's point. This smear campaign is about shaming and not about extortion. It must be very upsetting for the recipients to not have the opportunity to face their accusers and refute these allegations. That's a big part of their frustration and angst, Lydia agreed. It's obvious someone is purposely trying to torment these residents. For what reason? I don't know. Petty jealousy? Mental illness? An old grudge? Lydia shook her head, clearly bewildered. I'll need to scan these letters to work from. That's fine. Do whatever you need to do. After Madeline scanned each sheet with her phone, she asked, can you pinpoint when these taunts began? I don't know when Marta started receiving the letters, since none of them were dated, but Sylvia got her first one about 4 weeks ago. Louise couldn't remember exactly when she started getting them. She tore the first one into pieces and threw them in the trash. She kept the other 2 letters, but it took her weeks to work up the courage to speak to me about them. Lydia shifted uncomfortably in her chair. On top of being very shaken by these hateful letters, both women feel the sting of not being able to face their accuser and refute their accusations. They're both under duress, not knowing if their slurs will hit the rumor mill or if the author of these allegations intends to extort money from them. It's also possible there are more recipients who haven't come forward yet, Madeline speculated. That thought has been keeping me awake at night, Lydia admitted. Can't help worrying more victims will surface or that we'll lose another resident because of cruel taunts. That's why I need to find out whoever's doing this ASAP. One more question. Have there been any new hires in the last few months? Yes, we recently hired 3 new employees, 2 in food service and 1 in building maintenance. Madeline made a notation on her phone, then handed Lydia her business card. Send me their names, driver's license numbers, and their employment history, plus any comments in their files. Since this is a unique situation with a lot of moving parts, I'll come up with a plan that will allow us to observe all the residents and the staff at the same time. We'll need to have eyes and ears on the property. Lydia's shoulders slumped as she thought of what this could cost the facility and how she would explain the expense to the board of directors. There was also the threat of bad publicity if word of these incidents got out. What kind of surveillance are you suggesting? Lydia asked guardedly. Madeline's response was delayed while she mentally shuffled her resources and methods for handling a situation like this. Having an undercover presence on the property would be the most effective approach for observing day-to-day life at Monte Verde. She needed to have her team right out in front of everyone in positions ordinary enough to not draw any unwanted attention. Since she was already known here by some of the residents and staff, Samir and Nigel were the obvious choices for on-site coverage. They were young and engaging and could slip seamlessly into their undercover roles as employees without anyone becoming suspicious. After asking Lydia to find positions on her staff for 2 undercover investigators, she promised to send a contract with more specifics when she got back to the office. Because my dad knows everyone who works for me, I will have to tell him about Samir's and Nigel's assignments, Madeline warned the director. Otherwise, he could inadvertently blow the whole operation. Madeline could tell by Lydia's expression she was worried about how word of this scandal was getting out. Mack can be trusted to keep a secret, Madeline assured her. And I'm not just saying that because he's my dad. He's got a very strong code of ethics. I know, I definitely picked up on that, Lydia conceded. I can tell he's an honorable man, as good as they get. When Madeline stood up to leave, Lydia said, I can't thank you enough for your help. I'm glad you called me. I'll be in touch soon.